Now, hey guys, George at SoundTraxx here, and in this special edition of our videos, we're actually resurrecting some of our webinar series that we've done in the past. Now, today's webinar is actually pre-recorded in advance of this broadcast. Now, we decided to do this so that way we'd have a seamless interaction and video for you, so that way you can see the information live. We won't be interrupted by questions or anything like that. But if you do have any questions, be sure to email us at support@soundtraxx.com. We'll be sure to help answer any of those questions we can for you. But hopefully the information contained in today's webinar will actually be informational and give you enough information that you'll be able to go back with your models and experiment around with the sound. So first off, those of you guys who may not know me, my name is George Bogatuk. I've been working with SoundTraxx now almost 16 years. And I say working, but have I actually been working or have I been having fun? Now, over the years, I've met many of you guys at shows and things like that, and I really enjoy that aspect of it. And one of the other aspects of my job that I really enjoy is being able to do things like this that will help inform you about the decoders and all the features that we've built into the decoders to help you enjoy running your model trains. So today's webinar is actually going to be about sound tools and audio tools and things like that we've built into the decoder. Now, we're going to dive into this. Now, everything we're going to talk about today is going to be applicable to both the Tsunami2 and the Blunami. Now, I'm going to use the Blunami because I can use the app, and we'll use on-screen demonstrations using the app to make the adjustments. But all these adjustments can be made in the Tsunami2 using a traditional DCC system using CVs. So you have the ability to do all of that on your own using CVs with the information that we're going to give you today. So with that, let's go ahead and get started. Now, the first thing we always want to know is just what is sound? This seems to be a very kind of ambiguous thing that most people don't really understand how it works. So let's talk about just the fundamentals of it first. So sound is what we hear as air pressure waves moving through the air that our eardrums inside, because of the air pressures and changes and stuff like that, move back and forth. And that allows our brain to interpret that as sound. So when you have a microphone or you have a speaker, and when you're talking even, that's why you have to breathe in to make your voice. And so as air goes through, your vocal cords manipulate that air pressure that's coming out in order to make sound. Now that sound, as I said, it travels through the air and is interpreted by our eardrums into electrical pulses that are then basically interpreted by our brain as audio sound, as sound. So when it comes to what is sound, the frequency of the sound, of the air pressure waves, so how frequent you hear those are the different sounds. So higher frequency is usually what they refer to, so the air pressure waves are a lot closer together. But when you say low frequency, that means the air pressure waves usually are traveling a little farther apart, and so that's what differentiates between high frequency and low frequency. Now, the pressure at which these air pressure waves travel through the air is what we interpret as volume. And so the louder the volume, the more air pressure that's being moved to generate that higher pressure, but all the individual sounds are based on the frequency of those air pressure waves. So when you look at the fundamentals of a speaker, you have a speaker frame that holds a diaphragm, and in that diaphragm you have a magnet attached. You have an electromagnet attached, and then that's running up against a permanent magnet. Now, as electricity flows through the circuitry or the electromagnet, it creates an electromagnetic field, which is either repulsed by the magnet or attracted to the magnet. And so that's how the speaker cone is moving back and forth to create air pressure waves. Now, one little side note is when you have a speaker surrounded in the frame and you have it sitting here loose and you attach sound to it, you'll hear some sound, but you're not going to hear the full depth of it. And the reason is because sound is air pressure. So when your speaker cone starts to move forward, it may create a positive air pressure wave moving on this side, but then it also creates a slight vacuum on the back side. So when the air is open to the same atmosphere, what happens is as that moves forward, the back vacuums and sucks out some of that air pressure And so that's why you don't get a great audio response when you don't have a baffle. Now the baffle will isolate the front and back of the speaker so that when your speaker cone is moving, those air pressure waves are not being negated by the back side of the speaker. And so those air pressure waves are now able to travel out through the atmosphere to your ears. So when it comes to the installation in your model, you're looking at the speakers. You have several different choices. You want to make sure that first off, of course, you want to match the power of the amplifier. In the case of this particular model, we actually have a Blunami P&P. So we want to make sure that we have two cube speakers in there, which we do, and so those two cube speakers work together, and when they're working together, they're able to absorb the 2 watts of power, but then now that they're working together, they can add pressure to those low frequencies that the speaker physically can reproduce so that our ears are more likely to hear it. It's the same effect that when you put on headphones, for example, you can really hear those low frequencies, but as soon as you pull that speaker or that headphone away by a few inches, instead of hearing boom, 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 you're hearing more of a tss, 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 tss sound. That's because those small speakers can only reproduce those low frequencies at also low pressure. And so the farther away, the more likely you are to not be able to hear those low frequencies because the atmosphere basically negates those low pressure air frequency and dissolves it into the air. So those are some of the factors you want to keep in mind when you're actually putting your model together, and so that way you get the best audio. So be sure to check out the website so that you can get all the speaker specifications so that you'll know what speaker is going to be best paired with your model, as well as sizes, so that you can find the best one that's going to fit in your model and also deliver good sound. Now, some of the features that we have built into the decoder, and these are ways that you can adjust the audio of your decoder to behave more like the model that you've installed it in. This is where we've added a lot of these tools, and we're going to talk about a lot of those today. So the first one we're going to talk about is volume control. Now, one of the simplest things is volume control. If you want the volume louder, you can make this volume of a particular sound effect louder or quieter. So looking here at my Blunami, I'm going to actually hit the gear setting, and what that's going to do is that's going to take me into settings. So you see the first one is going to be sound settings. First off, we have the master volume, and this takes the master volume, basically all the sounds collectively together at their various ranges, and moves them up and down together. So that way you can reproduce the sound profile using the individual volumes, and then you can adjust them up and down together. Now, as you can see here on the screen, the Blunami, I just have a master volume that I can simply adjust. So I can take my finger and slide it up and down, and that will increase the volume, or I can reduce the volume with my finger, or I can type in the box. And so I can type here, I want to have a master volume of 200. We'll press apply, and now my volume is 200. So it's a whole lot louder than it was before. Now, comparatively speaking, we'll go back into our sound settings, and whoops, not main sounds. Let's go to master volume. And if I want to type this into 50, which is where it started, we're going to go back. You can already hear how there's a significant difference in the overall volume of the air horn. Now, that's just one of the many sounds because I haven't started it up yet, because once we start the prime mover, that sound is going to be competing with my voice. But we'll get the prime mover started up here in just a few moments. But when it comes to sound settings, again, we're going to go into the app, we're going to go into main sounds, and you'll notice that each one of these sound listings on the screen are actually showing you a volume setting. So right there we have our prime mover set at a volume of 126. We move to our air horn, which is set to a volume of 160. Down here to bell volume is 41. So if we want to test that, we can simply push the icon next to the bell. It'll give us that instant feedback. So I can come in here, let's say I want to change that to 200. Whoops, 200, not 2000. Now you can instantly hear how that bell sound has changed just by making the adjustments. So we can go back down to a better, whoops, again, trouble using my brand new fingers. So now you can see that bell has changed. And so we scroll through here, we have different volumes. Whoops, let's stop selling ice cream. So you have all these different volume settings, and every single sound effect that we built into the decoder has a volume adjustment, so that way you can adjust how the decoder behaves. Now, one of the other things that this allows you to do is, for example, let me see if I can find it really quickly. I bet it's under other sounds. There it is. Dynamic brake. Now, in a locomotive like I have here, for example, this S4, chances are it probably doesn't have a dynamic brake. But if we're running this in a consist, we would want this to behave the same way with other locomotives. But because it doesn't have dynamic braking, we would actually take the dynamic brake volume and set it to 0. But now we can also go in and adjust our rates, which is, we'll save that for another video or another clinic. If you want to see more on that, be sure to search our YouTube channel for dynamic braking. You'll see all that functionality built in. But in this case, I can set my brakes to match those of my other locomotives. So that way, when it's running in a consist, it's not playing the sound, but it does behave the same way it would as if it actually did have a dynamic brake sound. So that way, the decoder is actually playing the sound, but it's playing it at 0 volume, so we don't hear it. So that's one of the many ways you can go through and customize the decoder's behavior to fit your model that you've installed it into. Now, some of the other sounds we'll scroll through here. Another example of this would be, let's see, where is it? There it is, air conditioner. Now, this model obviously would not have an AC unit, but every now and then you may hear it trigger and cycle on. This is another example of how you can use the decoder to model the locomotive that you've installed it. So we can actually take our air conditioning volume and set it to 0. So while it may be playing, we don't actually hear it, because then this model actually would not have an air conditioner. So those are the types of things that you can use to adjust the sound. Now, one of the other things we have built into the decoder is a second set of volume settings, and these are the auxiliary volume mixers. Basically what this does, this allows you to have a second set of volumes, whether you're trying to do a different profile in how the decoder behaves, or you can do a second set of volumes, so you can have one set of loud volumes, say for the club, and a set of lower volumes for when you run at home. This is entirely up to you and your imagination how you want to use it. Now, one of the ways I've used it in the past, and again, search our YouTube channel for this video, but I've used the alternate volume mixer as a way to go in and adjust the sounds of the locomotive down so that I can simulate towing a unit dead. Now, because our locomotives are gear driven off of an electric motor, we can't just drag the locomotive around, and so we typically would want to have the auxiliary set of mixers down to where the prime mover would be quiet, the horn and the bell and things like that, but the wheel clickety clack would be there, and of course we would have control of the motor. So that's one other example of how you'd use the alternate volume mixer. Now, how would I do that? Well, I can go in here to my app, and down here towards the bottom you see alternate sound mix. Now, this is where I can actually go through and adjust all of the volumes to approximately half or lower of what I want to do, or in the case of, as I mentioned, carrying a dead unit, I can go through and turn off these other sounds. So it's entirely up to you. But I will tell you, out of the package by default, the decoder has this setting disabled. So if you do want to take advantage of the alternate volume mixer, you will need to go in and function map the alternate volume mixer. So that's using volume settings is just one way that we've built into all the audio tools to let you get the most out of your decoder. Now, the next audio tool we have built in is what's called dynamic digital exhaust. Now, this may not sound like an audio tool per se, but it is a way to help give your locomotive a little bit of individual performance and adjust the sounds based on how the locomotive runs. Now, in between takes here really quickly, I did start up the locomotive so that the locomotive is running. So the idea behind this is when I start running the locomotive, about speed step 2 or 3, and let's go ahead and adjust the volume up really quickly so it's a little bit more audible. But what I'm going to do is I'm simply going to put my hand on the locomotive to cause it to work against my hand. And you can hear that engine notching up as the locomotive is working harder against my hand. And the same thing when I release, you can hear that diesel engine now backing down because now it's not working as hard as it was against my hand. So we'll go ahead and bring it to a stop. Now with the Tsunami 2, we do have some CVs that allow you to go in and customize the dynamic digital exhaust performance so that way the decoder kind of gets a feel for what the motor is going to use on a normal basis and then uses that as the baseline. So basically it kind of creates a graph internally and says, okay, this is my projected power consumption through the speed range. Whereas throttle goes up, so does the power use. And so what your decoder is doing is it using that as a guide. So if at any point the motor needs more power than say what the projected chart is, let's say it needs this much power, well, the dynamic exhaust processor can see that difference in need and then will increase the diesel engine accordingly. Now, as I mentioned in the Tsunami 2, there are some CVs that allow you to set so that you can customize the performance. However, in the Blunami app, we have a simple setting. Down here on the bottom of the screen, you see dynamic digital exhaust. We're going to go ahead and press that, and you can see here a brief description of what's going to happen, and we're going to press begin calibration. So we're going to go ahead and move this locomotive a little bit over to about here. Let's see, right about there. And we're going to press the begin calibration. And so the locomotive is going to start moving here in a moment as it's calibrating the dynamic exhaust. And so we need some space so that the auto calibration process can work and do the process and be able to calibrate. Now, as you can see, it didn't need that much space, but the app is actually going back and setting all the momentums back to where they were before we left. So now, in theory, you have a more tuned in dynamic exhaust experience than what you had before. So we've done some videos in the past about this dynamic digital exhaust calibration, how to do it, so be sure to check those out so that way you can set up your dynamic digital exhaust on your Tsunami 2 or the Blunami easily. Now, the next feature we have built into our audio tools is the graphic equalizer, or the 7-band equalizer. Now, what this does is this actually takes the individual frequencies of the individual sound profiles, and you can boost certain frequencies or cut certain frequencies. And what that does, it allows you to change the overall sound of the sounds coming out of the decoder. Now, you can use this for a couple of different things. Number one, you can change the tones a little bit so that your different locomotives sound a little bit different, or you can use this to minimize a particular speaker's weaknesses. So for example, our Cube speaker can reproduce down to 100 Hertz, but some of our other speakers may only go down to about 350 or so. And so what you want to do is you want to look at the frequency range of the given speaker, and you want to kind of cut those frequencies down below so that way you're not trying to reproduce frequencies that the speaker physically can't, which may cause distortion on the other frequencies. Now, in this particular example, I'm going to go ahead and use the 7-band equalizer to kind of boost some of the middle to low range frequencies so that we can make this locomotive sound a little bit differently. So in our Blunami app, and again, I'm using the app, but you can do this with your Tsunami 2 using CVs. I'm going to go in here to my sound settings, and then I'm going to go to equalizer. Now, as I scroll through here, you can see that there is some presets. Now, the equalizer has some presets that you can select to choose the overall sound. Now, when I click on this, you can see flat or disabled, which means no change, or you can do things based on micro speakers, big speakers, and so forth. And so just to kind of go and let you hear the difference, we're going to go with a micro speaker. And you kind of hear a little bit of how that changed because it really boosted some of the mid-range, which helps fool our ears into thinking that we're hearing some of the lower frequencies. But when I come over here to one of the medium or larger speakers, you can kind of hear how it's changing a little bit here and there. But for the best option or the best response to what your ears hear, we actually recommend using the user adjustable. So when I come in here, I'm going to hit that user adjustable, and now you can look at the equalizer as shown on the screen where I cut a lot of the low frequencies, boosted some of the middle ranges, and really kind of tailed down some of the high end, because these small speakers tend to be very efficient, especially at the high end. And so therefore we can tone those down. So it kind of gives an overall tone of the locomotive. So you can kind of hear how this locomotive has the same characteristics or profile of the Alco 539 Turbo, but doesn't sound exactly the same as it did a moment before. So we're going to go ahead and turn the equalizer off. And you can hear how a lot of that mid-range has suddenly disappeared. So this is how you can use that. Now the cool thing is with CVs or with the app, you can go in and boost that up. So you can kind of listen to what your ears are hearing. You'll be able to hear clipping or distortion coming out of the speaker. So that gives you the ability to really go in and just dial it out and really make it sound good to you. Because after all, it's your model, it's got to sound good to you. Now the next commonly used audio tool that we have is known as the reverb. And reverb is basically the sound of the atmosphere bouncing off of an adjacent surface. But in our reverb settings, we've also provided you with the ability to set an echo. So this echo can kind of be sounds bouncing off a distant surface. And so that's kind of when you're out in the mountains, you yell and you kind of hear it come back a few seconds later. That would be more of an echo, but go scream out in the field and then go scream next to a building and you'll kind of hear the difference where the building will give you that immediate reverb, reverberations as the sound bounces off an adjacent surface. So it's immediate, maybe even mixed in a little bit with that original sound. But with our Tsunami2 and Blunami, it does give you the ability now to go in and adjust and set those sounds for yourself. So right now we're going to go back to our settings. We're going to go under sound settings and we're going to go to reverb. Now you can see here we have some reverb presets, and again we can do the same thing. In this case you've got short, medium, and long reverb, which again is bouncing off an adjacent surface. Then we have our short echo, long echo, and an extra long echo. So this really allows you to kind of customize it. Now what I tend to like is somewhere around the long echo, but I'm going to explain a little bit further. So now when I hear and play the horn sounds, you can kind of hear that echo trailing off, where it gives a presence of tone. Whereas without the reverb, let's go back and take it without the reverb. We're going to go ahead and turn the reverb off. Now when we hear the horn, it's very flat and just ends. And so that would be kind of the correct sound, but now the reverb and echo allows you to create some atmosphere. So the reason I like the long echo is because when we get in here under reverb, I'm going to go ahead and make a long echo. Still can't seem to hit it. First day with my new fingers. And what we're going to do here is we've got our long echo. Now we can decide how much of that echo sound is fed back in to the respective sounds. So when we come up here to main sounds, and you'll see here there's a reverb for the prime mover setting. But we're not going to add it into the prime mover because we will just want to create that tone for the air horn. So we move up here to the air horn. You can see we've got about 141 set, which is a little bit above 50% of that echo fed in. So when we play the horn, you can kind of hear how that's playing. Now I can reduce this down quite a bit. I can take my slider bar, take it down. And even though we have selected the long echo, you can hear that it's really flat again. So you can determine how much for yourself. Now we're going to go ahead and crank it up all the way, and we're going to have 100% of that long echo applied to the air horn. So you kind of hear how that tails off. So again, you can tailor this for your particular layout. Personally, I kind of tend to like somewhere around the 75 range. So I'm going to go ahead and type in a value of 75. So now when I blow the horn, you get a little bit, but it's not overpowering and it doesn't really feel like you're out in the mountains. So again, this is where you have the ability to customize those sounds for what sounds good for you. Now, the next tool that we have built into the decoder that allows you to adjust the sounds is what's called the high pass filter. Now, this would be more in tune to minimizing a speaker's weaknesses. So most of the speakers that we would tend to fit in our models tend to be tweeters basically by audio standards. They're not by any stretch of the imagination going to be considered subwoofers. So what will happen is a lot of those sounds may be being tried to be reproduced by the speaker, but can cause distortion because the speaker only has so much travel. So when you get to a maximum, the speaker cannot go any further, but while it's trying to reproduce that low frequency, it's also trying to reproduce the mid-range. And so what can happen is you can also cause clipping or distortion. So we're going to go in here and we're going to go back to our sound settings, and this time we're going to go under the equalizer, which is where the high pass filter CV lives, or the setting in the Blunami app. So the high pass filter CV is CV224, and so you can go in and adjust this. Now the range is 0 to 255, so you want to kind of be careful not to cut too high, or else you'll lose even your mid-range. And so here you can see a preset value of 20. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and enable the user adjustable equalizer, so you can hear that low frequency. And then I'm just going to move this slider up a little bit, and you kind of hear how that it's cutting out the mid-range. Now I'm at about 50%, so you can see it's cut everything from about 50% down, and you can kind of hear how it's changing the overall sounds. So your high-pass filter is basically cutting out everything below that frequency level, and like I said, it's about a percentage. So it's not always exactly by hertz, so just kind of play with it, see where exactly you like it and what sounds good to you. And again, you don't want to cut out too much of the low frequencies. So as I move it down, you'll hear that it kind of comes back, those low frequencies. So experiment with it and see what you like and how it sounds good to you. Now the last audio tool I've got ready for you on this particular presentation is what's called prime mover pitch shift. Now of course by name it's only going to apply to the diesel engine. All of these sounds and tools that we've been talking about this whole presentation are applicable to both steam and diesel. I've just been using a diesel locomotive here in front of me as our example. So experiment with those tools and allow you to make your locomotive sound a little bit different each way. If you have a heavier steam locomotive and you want a little bit more bass out of that steam chuff, use the equalizer and boost the frequency. But with the prime mover pitch shift, now we can actually take a whole string of prime movers and just shift the pitch just a little bit so that they sound a little different. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to go back to my audio settings, and we're going to go to main sounds. And here under the prime mover, you can see where the pitch is. Now a value of 128 is right about in the middle, which means flat or no change. But what I can do is I can take that slider bar and move it up or down. Now for the Tsunami2 users, that's CV223 that allows you to adjust the pitch. And usually it's up and down, usually measured in cents, but you can go from 0, which is all the way down, as low as we allow it in our settings, or you can go up to 255, which again will be the highest. But let's play around with it and see how it is. So we're going to go all the way up to the top. So we're going to take our pitch and shift it up. Now I haven't moved the locomotive, we've just played with the prime mover, so you can kind of hear how it sounds like it's going a little higher in pitch. And then we're going to do the same thing. I'm going to move the pitch lower, so you can hear how it's changed. Now the sound recording is still playing at the same pace, it just sounds a lot different. So you can go in and make small changes to it. You can have a whole string of, in this case, S4s, where you line them up, and each one is just shifted to pitch just a little bit, again, so that way you can get that individual customization for your locomotive. Now, one of the things I do want to talk about really quickly when it comes to the perceptions of individual locomotives. Now, in many cases, you hear a lot of times, you'll hear every locomotive sounds exactly, or sounds their own way. Every locomotive sounds different. Well, yes and no, depending on who you talk to. I have a very good friend of mine who used to work out of Kansas City in Argentine Yard. And he's told me, he says, George, I've tried. A GP7 sounds like a GP7, sounds like a GP7. So from his perspective, actually working on the railroad, they all sound the same. But when we're rail fanning the railroads, we're in different locations all the time. So one time we may be downtown at the crossing, at the Diamond Interchange, and we're underneath highways. Or the next time we may be out in a field where it's passing us at speed. And so it's easy to accept that perception that every locomotive sounds different. Now, when we go back into when we were kids, when we were watching cartoons, anybody know what you would hear as thunder? Well, they certainly didn't go outside and record thunder. They would basically hit a giant sheet metal. And then our minds, with the action that was going on the screen, power suggestion told us that that was actually thunder. And the reality is that it sounded kind of like thunder, but it wasn't really thunder. And so when it comes to perception, a lot of times we as modelers, we don't live on the real railroads, we don't work on them. And so when we go out and we chase the same locomotive in different places, a lot of times you're hearing differences mostly by atmosphere. Not necessarily the locomotive itself. Or even if we chase a GP38 in one yard and then we go to another yard and it's another GP38, you're going to have a similar situation where they sound similar, but they may sound a little bit different because the atmosphere or where you're recording them is a little different. Now, with all of these audio tools that we've given you, you can actually go in and make those locomotives sound a little bit different if you so choose. Now, we could actually go in and we can record the same locomotive a lot of times where we could get 3 different recordings, just move the mic around a couple of different times when we're recording a locomotive, and then we can sell it to you as different recordings. We may edit even the same recording a little bit different depending on how the looping of the idle or the notches individually are sliced down and put into the decoder. So it really gives you the power in your hands to be able to customize that locomotive sound as much as you like or as little as you like. If you're like my friend in Argentina, that every locomotive, every GP7 sounds like a GP7, then you've got the tools in your hands to be able to do that. But if you're one of those ones that wants to have every locomotive with their own voice, we've given you the audio tools to be able to do that. So guys, with that, that's everything I have for our webinar series in this particular episode, talking about the audio tools. Now, I encourage you to check out our user's guide where you can go through and read about all of these in more detail and learn a lot more about how they work for you so that way you can go in and experiment. And the best thing is that no matter what value you put in your CVs, you cannot break the decoder because our decoder has some smart settings in there. So when you try to pick a value that maybe isn't an actual option, our decoder will actually override that and say, that's not a choice, and then put you back at the default, which normally is 0. So when we're talking about those predetermined echo and reverb settings, you have a value from 0 to 7 that are your presets. So if somehow you accidentally push 8, the decoder is going to say not a choice and then put you back down to a value of 0, which is flat or disabled. So you have those safeguards built into our decoders so that way you can experiment confidently, knowing that even if you accidentally fat finger a wrong key, I mean, look at these things. I do it all the time. That way you have that safeguard to know that you're going to be protected and our decoders are not going to break. So experiment with these. The good news is if you don't like the way it's turning out, just undo it. Go back out and take it and reset it and start over, experiment. You may find that this is the greatest thing in the world when you come with your different tools. And so therefore you may decide that, man, I can't believe I've lived this long without using the equalizer or whatever the case. So be sure to check out the user's guide. Also, we're here to help you. Don't forget, we do have a full-time support staff, including myself and Norman, who are here to be able to help you. So be sure you can send an email to support@soundtraxx.com, or you can give us a call and talk to a real live human being on the phone, 970-259-0690, extension 22, and we will be sure to help get you answered any questions you have regarding this topic today. So guys, we appreciate it. Thanks for watching. If you like this content, please be sure to comment below, leave us a like, a thumbs up, and also be sure to subscribe to our channel. If you're not subscribed to our channel, why not? We've got a lot of great information out there trying to help you get the most out of your model trains and with the decoders that we've given and sold you. So guys, we hope this has been helpful. Thanks very much for watching. We'll see you next time.